I've covered my fair share of dinosaur media on this show, but have yet to turn my attention to one of the most common and nostalgic methods of dino programming. The paleo documentary. Here's the thing though, when people try to highlight documentaries about prehistoric life, the most common subject is undoubtedly BBC's Walking with Dinosaurs, and/or the abundance of other documentaries made in its wake. Pre-Walking with series and specials don't really get as much airtime, and that's unfortunate because it's not like there isn't any interesting material to dig up. Yes, Walking with Dinosaurs was a very influential and groundbreaking series. Its simple, high-concept premise of, what if we made a documentary about dinosaurs but filmed it like a nature documentary, clearly struck a chord with people, which is part of what makes it fascinating to go back before that series aired and influenced the genre to see how prior filmmakers approached educating the general public on the lost world of the dinosaurs. Out of all the possible options I could have chosen for coverage in this video, I think I found a pretty ripe one. But before I get to that, here's a little something to get us started. 64 million years ago is a short documentary which comes to us courtesy of the National Film Board of Canada. It's pretty simple and doesn't have time for much at only about 11 minutes long. Basically, we're just following this little mammal dude across the landscape of Lake Cretaceous, wherever this takes place, as it encounters a menagerie of children's book stapled dinosaur taxa before yada yada the extinction happens, dinosaurs die, and mammals are left to inherit the earth. It's nothing you haven't seen before. But it might have been if you were a little Canadian child in 1981, and this was your first exposure to these events. If you were, I could see you having some nostalgia for this. If not, there isn't much to talk about. The interesting thing about this short film is that it's stop motion, and to give credit, it's not that bad. The models themselves aren't too shabby either, with this being one of the earliest dinosaur movies to depict animals like T-Rex as standing horizontally with their tail out for balance. Some of the puppets though do look like they were pulled out of a Charles Knight painting, and a lot of the behavior exhibited is questionable to say the least. The T-Rex especially. This has got to be one of the most indecisive dinosaurs ever depicted on screen. First he starts chasing an ornithomimus, then he gets distracted by an ankylosaurus and I guess decides, sure, this looks easy to kill. I think that would have broken its jaw if it was swung at full force, but the animation made it look kind of half-hearted on the ankylosaurus part, so I'll give it a pass. That is until it shows up again to chase the Edmontosaurus, and can I point out how hilarious the noises these guys make are? Those plants a little difficult to digest, guys? Like, they giving you some trouble? Whatever. Mammal runs into a Triceratops who also sounds like it's suffering from indigestion. The T-Rex has to fight it as well because he just sucks at everything and can't hunt for shit. But hey, at least we get to see a Triceratops gore an ornithomimus that was trying to eat its eggs. That's always fun. Oh, and wouldn't you know it, right as the T-Rex finally gets to enjoy a nice Edmontosaurus entree, the extinction happens. Woe was the plight of the dinosaurs, on nature's death row and still unable to enjoy their last meal. Yeah, I can't think of too much to say about this. If you grew up with it and it brings back memories, that's fine, and the animation is decent, but I only found this a few years ago, and after watching it for this video, I don't feel too inclined to revisit it. Also, what's up with the title? I guess now we're all saying the dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago instead of 65, but when was it 64? 1980s Canada, I guess. Now, it's time for the main event. Dinosaur! No, really, it's Dinosaur with an exclamation point. Aired on CBS on Guy Fawkes Night 1985. Conceived by producers Robert Jeanette and Stephen Mark Paul, and animator Phil Tippett, who we'll get to, Dinosaur is one part nature documentary, 2 parts history lesson. Human history, that is. Because while there is lots of stop motion dinosaur action to be found, a lot of the runtime is split between that and live action host segments discussing the history of paleontology as a field of study, and the cultural impact that dinosaurs have had on human society. And who better to host a documentary about the mightiest creatures that ever lived than the goddamn Man of Steel himself? That's right, Christopher Reeve presents, and his natural charisma and clear enthusiasm for the material makes a lot of this documentary easy to get through, even when there's no dinosaurs on screen. Apparently Reeve was something of a dino fan himself, and really wanted to be in this special, and wasn't just cashing an easy paycheck. I respect that. Aside from Reeve, the main star of this documentary is naturally Phil Tippett's Dinosaurs. If you don't know Phil Tippett by name, you'll certainly know him by his body of work. Those clay chess monsters on the Millennium Falcon? That was Phil. Imperial Walkers? Also Phil. Ed 209? Dragon Slayer? Howard the Duck? All Phil. And that's only his stop or go motion, we'll get to that. Needless to say, the guy's resume speaks for itself. In fact, a few years ago, he released his very own movie, Mad God, a project 30 years in the making. So go watch that if you're interested in supporting stop motion. Damn it, I mean go motion. Okay, I gotta make this distinction. Go motion is a variation of stop motion developed in the early 80s that's biggest breakthrough was its ability to simulate motion blur. See, because stop motion involves arranging a bunch of still images in sequence with each other to simulate movement, the in-between frames appear unnaturally sharp as compared to the live-action footage, which has that momentary fuzziness of an object moving as the camera's shutter is open. The specifics of go motion I won't get into here. The main takeaway for me bringing it up is that Phil Tippett, in conjunction with Industrial Light and Magic, was responsible for this technique, and even created a short film showcasing it entitled Prehistoric Beast, which depicts a fateful duel between a Monoclonius and a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And it was this short that convinced Jeanette and Mark Paul to approach Tippett and ask for more go-motion dinosaurs, to which Phil happily obliged. He even got to reuse some footage from Prehistoric Beast in the documentary itself. The go-motion sequences are clearly the standout of the special, not just for the animation, but how Tippett and company got creative with the filmmaking surrounding the models, incorporating zooms, pans, and frantic editing during the action, leading to more dynamic sequences that you didn't often get with stop motion, presumably because it's a pain in the ass. I could see why this led to Steven Spielberg initially bringing Tippett on board to create the full-motion dinosaurs for Jurassic Park, but of course we all know how that story ends. Dennis Muren and ILM showed Steven what their newly engineered CGI was capable of, and Spielberg decided to move ahead with that instead. It's kind of a shame this technology was abandoned when it was, as it seemed to only be getting better and better the more projects Tippett and his team did. Who knows, maybe if it hadn't been for CGI, go motion would have become the industry standard for creature depictions and disseminated throughout the VFX industry in much the same manner. Food for thought. But getting back to the documentary, is there anything worth recommending here outside of the dinosaur animation? In my opinion, yes. See, because this documentary devotes so much time to exploring humanity's relationship with dinosaurs, both from paleontologists and average people, it offers an interesting snapshot and a time capsule of the mid-80s. And I'm not just talking about the hairdos. The 1980s was an interesting period in socio-paleontological history. It was pre-Jurassic Park, so not quite at the apex of that late 20th century dinomania, but it was getting there, and it had been since at least the 70s with the dinosaur renaissance. By the mid-80s, a lot of that knowledge that had been uncovered in the previous decade was starting to trickle down to the general public. And then we got Jurassic Park, which was the proverbial waterfall. Suddenly everyone knew what a velociraptor was, that T-Rex stood horizontally, and that maybe dinosaurs were more closely related to modern-day birds than they were reptiles. But the uphill climb to that point began with shows like Dinosaur. And the Renaissance influence is all over this special. Every animal looks like it's been doing CrossFit, they're all fast and mobile, and there's the obligatory pot shots of older prehistoric media saying, "We used to think this, but now we know this." Which of course is rather amusing in hindsight with just how much our conception of dinosaurs has evolved since this aired. It's humbling, I guess would be a good way of putting it. I don't want to rag on the scientific inaccuracies too much though, since that's par for the course for documentaries about extinct life because, well, science marches on. What I will comment on is some of the non-paleontological information that's just blatantly wrong. Like they say King Kong came out in 1932 when it was actually 1933. That I can forgive, it's only a 1-year difference, except earlier they also said The Lost World was released in 1922 when it was 1925. Again, missed it by a few years. Wait, but then they also say Gertie the Dinosaur is from 1919 when it was actually from 5 years prior, and they're using footage from the wrong cartoon. Man, this guy really sucked at his job. Two guys who did not suck at their jobs were Peter Scherer and John Holbrook, who were responsible for the hilarious synth-pop score for this special. Again, really showing off how it's a product of its time, but in all the best ways. Another indication this was made a while ago, they leave just what killed the dinosaurs a mystery. To this day, what wiped out all non-avian dinosaurs isn't unanimous, but more and more people are generally accepting that it was probably the asteroid. For a while though, there was no commonly accepted hypothesis. Pretty much everyone had their own ideas, and this documentary spotlights some of them in its closing scenes. All of them are interesting, to me anyway. But you know who has my favorite take on the extinction? You're not gonna believe it when I tell you. Jack Horner. Yes, he made an ass out of himself later on with his T-Rex scavenger theory, but he is not an idiot, and not every word that comes out of his mouth is complete bunk. Here's what he says.
I don't care what killed the dinosaurs. For me, it's very important to study and learn why the dinosaurs were so successful.
I agree. Maybe we do focus a little too much on that blink of an eye 66 million years ago, when we should really be more impressed by the 150 million years that preceded it. From there, the special ends with two more sections worthy of note. One is the spotlight shown on Dale A. Russell's speculative Dinosauroid or Troodon Man. I think just looking at this thing should clue you into what his hypothesis was. The second is Reeves' final narration, which really sums up the whole point of this documentary in the first place. Check it out.
They're not creatures from museums or fossil beds. They're made of more than rock and sand. They're eternal because they live in our imagination.
For what it is, I think Dinosaur is actually a good little documentary. Well, okay, let me clarify what I mean by that. As a documentary, i.e. as far as being informative goes, it's pretty bad, with a lot of the information either being outdated or blatantly false. But it's entertaining in spite of that. I like it because it has a little bit of everything. The reconstruction sequences are great, but the rest of it manages to keep your attention rather than just being filler in between the animation. Reeve is a good host / narrator, and when you've watched as many dinosaur documentaries as I have and become familiar with all the faces of paleontology, well, seeing them in something you only found recently is like running into an old friend. Recommending this is a little troublesome since, it just is what it is. If you have an eccentric affinity for old dinosaur media, great, seek this out and watch at your leisure. It's right here on YouTube. If not though, then why are you even watching this video? Thank you for watching, have a great day, and until next time, see ya.